Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Jay Speak. This week, we're going to talk about your signal chain. So, things that are maybe obvious and not so obvious in your signal chain, but every piece matters. Everything from your guitar, your amp, cable, effects pedals, speakers, the size of the cabinet you're using, whether you have buffers, the length of your cables, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. So, let's take a look at the basics. Obviously, you have your guitar and you have your amp. If you're a purist, you take that high quality cable, you go from your guitar, your amplifier, you're good, man. But if you're a little crazy like I am and you use a bunch of pedals, you gotta think about your rig a little bit more. Obviously you can run stereo, you can do wet dry rigs, but let's just say you have a guitar, an amp cab, or an amp and a cab, and I don't know, you're running a delay and a phaser or something in the loop and you're using a wah-wah up front. Now obviously you want a good high quality cable that goes from your guitar to your wah to your amp. And then in the effects loop, you obviously want good quality cables running from your delay to your phaser and to your amp in the send and returns. Always make sure you get your send and returns right. Otherwise you will get no sound with some amps, and otherwise you will get just nonsense. It really just depends. Now, with those cables, you want to make sure they're as short as possible. The shorter the cable, the better quality, the better fidelity you're going to get overall. Now, if you're a gigging guitar player or you got a big room and you want to be away from your amp, it makes it a little harder. I mean, you can get a 20-foot cable, that's fine. Sometimes you need buffers. Some pedals are built with buffers that they allow to bring that signal back up so you're not losing anything. I know that Mesa Boogie just made a couple pedals. I think they're called a Stowaway, and there's one other one. Maybe it's called a line buffer. But some of your pedals, like Strymon, some of the TC stuff, have built-in buffers in them already. So you can get away with a longer cable, but in general, run as short as possible. Now the same goes for your amp head to your cabinet. If you can get away with a foot cable, use it. If you can get away with 3-foot cable, use it. Anything beyond 3 feet is probably unnecessary, unless you're running like multiple heads in the one cab, or you're using one head to multiple cabs. There's a difference. Now, when you get to your cabinet, obviously there's a difference between 112s, 212s, and 412s. Hopefully you checked out my article, the Orange blog, last week. If not, check it out, links below. But that talks about just the size of your cabinet, what to deal with, what not to deal with. But overall, the speaker is really important. The wattage it takes, even the ohms. Ohms are kind of a fickle thing. In Europe, a lot of the amps are based on 16 ohm, and in the States, a lot of them are based on 8 ohm. So if you run a 16 ohm amp, or at least one that is supposed to, you're going to get a little more mid-range if you're running 8 ohm, I find. But make sure you're obviously connecting the correct ohm from your head to your cab. Now, the speakers in those cabs are going to react differently. Like the Celestion Greenback, which is a wonderful speaker. I have a cabinet with those in it. But typically they run 25 watts. You have 2 of them in a cab, that's 50 watts. You have 4 in a cab, that's only 100 watts. Generally, you want to go twice as much, or at least beyond what your amp wattage is putting out. If you've got a 100-watt amp, you can get 2 V30s. They run 120 watts. That seems to help because they're generally 60 watts a piece. But your Greenback to your V30 to your G12Hs to, you know, your Scumbags, your Celestion Blues, they all have different wattages, and they all sound slightly different. The curves are going to be different. The low end they put out is different. The high end is definitely going to be different. So it's important you try to match your head and your cab accordingly. Now, there are no real rules as far as can you use a Marshall head with a Mesa Boogie cabinet. As long as the ohm output is good and you're not going to blow some speakers and you got the right amount in there and the wattage is good, you're fine. So don't think you need to go buy, you know, a Riviera head and a Riviera cabinet. Now, they might sound a little bit better together, but to be honest with you, I use a lot of orange cabs. I've got one that I built that is based on the open back orange cab. I use that with Mesas, Voxes, Oranges, Fenders. It doesn't matter. The cabinet itself sounds great. I have greenbacks loaded in. The other nice thing I will say about greenbacks with an amp manufacturer such as Mesa is that they take it down. They put out less output, so that's kind of nice. So it brings down the dB a little bit. And why that's nice is it's less loud. So if it's just you playing in a room, sometimes you want greenbacks. If you're going to play out, play with V30s or whatever. But that matters. Speakers matter to how your overall sound is projected. So not only does your amp matter, but cabinet matters, but the speakers inside also matter. You could go absolutely crazy trying to perfect your rig. That's why I think guitar players have so many multiples of everything, and we're constantly buying and selling and those types of things. So don't feel bad. You got to find your path, and trust me, you'll get there one day. Or you'll just keep buying and selling, and it kind of is what it is. But again, every part matters. The strings you use matter. The pick matters. I might be sounding like you got to put way too much thought in it than you need to, but overall, just think about your rig. Think about it. See if there's any shortfalls. Any of the things I mentioned you could possibly correct. You might get a better sound. I know for a while there, I was playing out with a Mesa half stack, and I was using a Roadster, and I was using an effects loop and all this stuff. And then one day I did hard bypass, and the amp sounded so much better not running the effects loop that I stopped using the effects loop. And then eventually I stopped using effects, and I just went straight into the guitar amp. I just found it a better signal. At that time, I was using a lot of Boss and MXR pedals. Now this goes back a decade, but you know, I found I just like the guitar and the amp, even though I love effects. I really do. Nowadays, the pedals are a little bit better. I moved on. I'm using some Strymon stuff or some MXR stuff and some TC that is true bypass. And I've got buffers and everything. So in the end, my signal chain remains relatively clear. I can test that by plugging in everything up front and not using an effects loop, go right into the amp, play a little bit, and I've recorded in some cases, and then pull it, go straight into the amp, and it sounds exactly the same. So I'm not losing anything. So that's the other part. Make sure you're not losing anything by running long cables, using tons of pedals up front. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, leave them below, comments below. This week we're going to take a look at the Orange Rocker 32, which is awesome. I just did some guitar comparisons with it, so they'll be coming as well. But this week we are going to check out a demo, just an overall review. It is a long video. The first part is done with 30 watts. The second done is with 15 watts. And I even go into some external cabs. So check it out. Have a good week.